Well, when we're in marketplace contexts, or educational contexts, or even in our neighborhoods with people we live with, we no longer have the expectation as to the kind of worldview people will hold to, or the kind of perspectives they'll have on religion, morality, parenting, sexuality, ethics. Really, all kinds of perspectives are going to be out there. If we thought that there was a culture war going, there isn't. Christianity is long lost. We are in a pluralistic context, a post-Christian context, and we should never be surprised by the kinds of worldviews, the kinds of values that are being espoused. In fact, if anything, we've got to learn and continue to learn how to gain a hearing by engaging and by listening and by caring and by conversing, and yet holding to a position of confidence and clarity to what we believe. And to enter into deliberations and discussions with openness, with grace, but this is the kind of world we live in, where our expectations need to change. But when it comes to our homes, we're going to be very acutely careful as the kind of filtering we engage in as to what comes into our homes. And when we talk about our churches, in the same way we want to protect our children, we want to protect God's flock. We want to protect God's people. So just a few quick illustrations from some of my time in pastoral ministry. In our church in Burlington, where I serve, we had Mormon missionaries who tried to join our small group ministry as small group leaders. We had sexual predators who tried to become involved in our children's ministry. We had single men who sought to become leaders in our single adult ministry so that they could take advantage of the opportunity that they had to connect with single women. We had people come into our environment with the express intent of somehow sowing seeds of dissent and division, threatening lawsuit, and wreaking havoc. And I thought we were a pretty healthy church. And then we had people who espoused correct doctrine. They were orthodox, at least in their belief system, in their theological frameworks, but their behavior and their lifestyle didn't match that. And not only was there occasional absence of the fruit of the Spirit, there was blatant hypocrisy. And so these things happened in my church. They are happening in your churches, and they happened in the early church. So let's continue on our study of Titus. Titus chapter 1, and we're going to start reading at verse 10. But let me remind you of the context here, because Paul is writing to Titus, a young leader. He's the organizing leader here, and he's saying you need to set up and deputize and train more leaders for the church here at Crete. And he says to them, after really driving home the need for character qualifications, he says in verse 9, just to give it flow and context, he's talking about leaders here, and he talks about how leaders must hold firm to the trustworthy word as taught, so that he may be able to give instruction in sound doctrine, or really healthy doctrine, and also rebuke those who contradict it. So recall last time we met, we talked about how in teaching, this is the only technical skill beyond qualifications. This is the one absolutely non-negotiable technical skill that leaders have to have, is the ability to teach, ability to communicate truth. And it was teaching from an educational point of view and teaching from a defensive point of view or an apologetic point of view. So he's just set the stage. They've got to be able to teach positively and correct the negative. Now, new paragraph. For there are many who are insubordinate, empty talkers and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision party. So here he actually goes to a specific example. He talks broadly about the need for teaching. And now he says, because you've got some people in your midst who are blatantly teaching a message which is completely antithetical to the gospel. You need to deal with it. These particular ones, he talks about empty talkers and deceivers, these particularly were the circumcision party. In other words, they were Jewish legalists. He's going to tease that out in just a moment. They must be silenced because they are upsetting whole families and teaching for shameful gain what ought not to be taught. Now remember, we're not talking about outside the body. We're not talking about grace in our demeanor and our approach and how we enter into conversation, engagement. We're talking about in the church. And he says, you have people in the church who are messing people up, who are destroying whole families. They've got to be stopped. This is blatant falsehood that's destroying families. He said they must be silenced. They're for shameful gain. One of the Cretans, a prophet of their own, said, Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons. Here he's quoting Epimenides, who was a Jewish philosopher, poet, and he says, by their own admission, they're liars and they're deceivers, lazy gluttons. And he says in verse 13, this testimony is true. Now, Paul could be just underscoring the gravity of the poor reputation that the Cretans had. Or maybe he's being a little bit sarcastic or even humorous, saying, well, Epimenides was a Cretan. He always lies. And he says all Cretans are liars, and you sort that out. But at any rate, he's saying that their reputation is bad, and their reputation of deception has made inroads into your church. And he says how their testimony is true. Therefore, rebuke them sharply that they may be sound, or again, healthy, in the faith, not devoting themselves to Jewish myths and commands of people who turn away from the truth. The Jewish legalism, those of the circumcision party, were likely connecting to some Gnostic ideas and to some ascetic beliefs. In other words, their secret knowledge was all about knowledge into the mysterious, knowledge of the spiritual realm. The world of the physical is lesser. Body, bad. Appetite, bad. Desire, bad. And so those associated with this kind of Gnostic Jewish asceticism were adding rules to the gospel. And he said they're distorting truth. He says, by way of correction, to the pure, all things are pure, but to the defiled and the unbelieving, nothing is pure, but both their minds and their conscience are defiled. They profess to know God, but they deny by their works, and they're detestable, disobedient, unfit for any good work. Jesus talked about where defilement and corruption really comes from. It doesn't come from external sources. It might be catalyzed by external sources, but it doesn't originate from external sources. Jesus himself said in Mark chapter 10, he said, hear me, all of you, and understand, there is nothing outside a person that by going into him can defile him, but the things that come out of a person are what defile him. It's already there. And so, external stimuli, external context, let's be prudent, let's be wise, but those stimulate and catalyze what's already in there. And so what Paul's saying is, these deceivers, these ascetics, these Jewish legalists, they're adding to the gospel, and the reality is everything they do is corrupt. To someone who really is pure, someone who understands the forgiveness that they've received in Christ, and for someone who looks upon moral structures with an appropriate perspective, to the pure, inside, all things are pure. Because they've got a correct motive. They've got a correct framework at work. And regardless of their context, regardless of where they are, they live out a different worldview because they think differently. To the pure, all things are pure. But to the defiled, inside, everything they do is defiled. And that's how he's describing these Jewish legalists, these ascetics, these Gnostics. Now, here on the island of Crete, the issues that they were dealing with were related to asceticism and Jewish legalists, and people were adding to the gospel with rules. Why do we do that? Because there's something inside of us that wants to compare us with someone else, And when we think of somehow earning some sort of recognition or praise from God, or acknowledgement from God, or attaboy, we think, at least I'm not like these schleps here. Look at me, God, you got a pretty good catch, right? And so we compare. And we add rules. And we somehow think in our folly, literally our folly, that God is somehow impressed with our rule keeping. The Pharisees did this. Jesus said, you guys are whitewashed tombs, meaning you're dead in the inside. You look nice and clean on the outside, but you're dead in the inside. You're defiled in the inside because you're defiled in the inside, everything you do is defiled. But to the pure, all things are pure. To the defiled, everything you do is defiled. So these legalists were adding to the gospel because they somehow thought in the distorted thinking that God was somehow noticing them. Look I keep all these rules. I buffet my body. I don't eat this, I don't eat that. I don't drink this, I don't drink that. I keep awake here, and I don't sleep here, and I have all these ceremonial cleansings. I do all these things. Notice me. And that's what Paul is warning Titus of. Now that's here at Crete. You go to Corinth, they had a completely different problem, didn't they? There was all about the abuse of grace, license. And there they had jettisoned all kinds of sexual moral frameworks. There was all kinds of counterproductive division going on. There was economic disparity, and not just economic disparity, but economic partiality and discrimination. There was pride. So one group says, well, I'm going to earn my way to heaven. The other group says, well, I don't know if there's a heaven or not, but I'm going to live exactly the way the desire I have at this given moment catalyzes me and stimulates me and makes me feel good. Both are rooted in terrible theology, wrong thinking, and bad theology always distorts morality. So, Paul here wants them to get it right, and I'm going to circle back to this in a moment. But let's read on. New chapter, new thought. We can't take all year through Titus, so I'm pushing us along. But look at chapter 2, and we'll tie it all together. Chapter 2. But as for you, by way of contrast, once you corrected these deceivers and empty talkers, these ascetics, but as for you, teach, and he's constantly telling Titus, you need to be a teacher. Teach, communicate truth. Teach what accords with sound doctrine. Again, this is what accords with healthy doctrine, healthy theological truths. Truth is always meant to be applied and be transformative. And then he talks about some particular social groups. He says, older men are to be sober-minded. In other words, wineless. They're not to be addicted to wine, as talked about earlier with elders in chapter 1. Dignified, self-controlled, sound or healthy in faith, in love, steadfastness. This is what more mature men are to look like. Older women, likewise, the same kind of spirit, to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. Again, this whole need for self-control and moderation. They're to teach what is good. They're also teachers. And they're to teach what's good. So train younger women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled, pure, workers at home, kind and submissive to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be reviled. So here he gives older women this responsibility of discipling the next generation. Now, certainly the scriptures always have cultural context. And we know that particularly here, Greek women in this particular cultural context were often isolated from the family, isolated even in the home. And oftentimes wouldn't even eat with the male members of the household. Seldom seen in the community, didn't engage in community affairs. And so Paul was always cautious in his approach to social reform. He never wanted to risk ministry in his admonition for social reform. No hurry to change social structures at the risk of compromising the ministry. We're going to see that in slavery in a minute too. So in part he's saying, look, this is your cultural context. Honor the cultural context you find yourself in. And have women engage in discipling the younger women. But I do think there's some larger creational message here. And we'll just touch on it here, and you wrestle with it, you continue to deliberate with it, and you certainly will do it in your own home. But there's something undeniably distinct about the male gender and about the female gender and how they relate to one another in community, how they relate to one another in marriage, how they relate to children as father and as mother. And Paul is saying here, you need to help the older women transmit truth into the next generation, that the Word of God might not be maligned. Then he continues. He talks about what younger women are to be like and what they're to receive from these older women. And then he says this, likewise, in the same spirit, the same teachable responsiveness to God's truth, likewise urge the younger men to be self-controlled. I find it interesting that with all the other social groupings, older men, older women, younger women, he gives several qualities. With younger men, he says they need to be self-controlled. Do they need more than that? Yes. But I think it's Paul's way of underscoring, look, if you can get a young man to control his passion, you control so much. Drive home the need for self-discipline in young men. Teach that. Have the older men pouring into the younger men. Have the older women pouring into the younger women. And then he says to Titus himself, he says, you show yourself in all respects to be a model of good works. Titus was probably around 40 here. And he's saying, you, Titus, you yourself need to be a model, an example to these young men. Show yourself an example. And in your teaching, show integrity, dignity, sound speech, healthy speech that cannot be condemned, so that an opponent may be put to shame, having nothing evil to say about us. People are watching you. You're representing Christ. Pour out that same kind of integrity, the same kinds of values into your people. And then he refers to one more social grouping. He talks about slaves. Slaves are to be submissive to their own masters in everything. They're to be well-pleasing, not argumentative, not pilfering or stealing time or money, but showing in all good faith, so that in everything they may adorn the doctrine of God, our Savior. Now we know from Galatians 3:28, there's neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female. The gospel is the great equalizer. But even here, Paul said, if you're in a Roman home, or if you're in a Greek home and you're a slave, do your job. And again, he was in no hurry to uproot social structures. The scripture would never support an abusive slavery kind of model. The Old Testament had it, but it was really more of a debt repayment process. But the New Testament does not affirm or promote slavery, but it says if you are a slave, ministry comes first. Your testimony to your master comes first. So, work hard, be a testimony. Read Philemon for a little bit more interaction between how Paul viewed slavery and freedom. He's very concerned about the gospel and the testimony that even slaves would have before masters in those given social structures. In time, those social structures would change for families and for slavery. But here he says, you know what? The testimony of the gospel matters. So here are applications. We always want to say, what's the relevance? Let's make the transferable connection from 2,000 years ago today. What's relevant here? Now let me identify a couple of principles. What do we learn about biblical truth? Well, here we see, yet again, that truth corrects error and creates excellence. It corrects error. It shows us where our thinking is wrong. And that's what he said to Titus. Titus, you need to point out the error. Always with the view of restoration. I mean, the hope was that these ascetics would set aside their legalistic practices. Truth identifies error and then creates excellence. Moral excellence. Relational excellence. Not as in perfection. None of us will achieve perfection. 1 John says, anyone who says you haven't got sin, you're lying. You're deceiving yourself. No, we won't achieve perfection, but we can strive for excellence. And what truth gives us is a right way to think. You see, we all have lies that we believe. Sometimes it's particularly associated with pain and hurt, but we all have these wrong perspectives on God and on relationships, and they distort how we think, and they impact how we live. And the scriptures are designed to help surface those errors and replace it with truth. Now, I brought my golf club up here, my driver. It's very clean because it's hardly used. Do you know what I hate about golf is when somebody says, do you golf? And I say, well, very poorly. I'm bad. And well, yeah, I'm bad too. And they're not bad at all. I'm truly bad. There's no exaggeration there. It's just the simple truth. But when I play golf and I, line up and square off with the tee and the flags down there, and first get my left hand right and the arm straight, and then shake hands, and I work at my form, and I have a lousy golf swing. I'm not even going to demonstrate here because I have a little bit of pride. But I have a lousy golf swing. And at various times people say, well, Mike, you just need a little tweaking here. They're kind. You just need a little tweaking. But what happens is I have to unlearn bad habits before I learn that beautiful, graceful pivot and drive that ball down the fairway. I have a bad... So, what does truth do? It first isolates and identifies the wrong thinking and the wrong behavior. And friends, that is a good thing. Do not see God as some sort of cosmic killjoy. We would never say that, but sometimes we still think it because we live that way. Because we think, you know what, I want to do this because it really, really feels good. And God's saying, no. Honesty produces trust. Deception creates all kinds of fallout. Taking responsibility leads to building relational structure. And when you tear that down, everyone hurts, everyone pays for it. And so everything that God gives us is for our good. But first it says you need to stop doing this, and that's why we repent. And we confess, we own the error, we own the deception, and we replace it with excellence. Moral, behavioral, relational, theological excellence. I want to take you down one more path. The second principle that emerges out of this. What do we learn about discipleship here? Paul teaches Titus, and Titus says, teach elders and be a role model to young men, older men teaching younger men, older women teaching younger women. What do we learn about discipleship here? We learn something about discipleship here as well. We learn that we are stewards of knowledge, therefore share. Let me challenge you to think differently about discipleship. We tend to think of discipleship as sort of this mechanical thing. Okay, I was discipled. I met Tuesday morning from 7 to 8 for 4 years, and I need to think of it this way. Everything God gives you is not yours. We are stewards, which means we're managers of somebody else's property. We are stewards of truth. And the education that you're receiving, the biblical education, the knowledge that you're receiving, is not just for your good. It's intended to be transmitted into the next generation, into the guy or gal in the next dorm room. Truth is meant to be shared. Knowledge is meant to be shared. So think differently about discipleship. Sometimes I'll hear a parishioner of their church say, you know what? We need our pastor to give more meat of the word. And I know what they're saying. They're not happy with the preaching. They're not happy with the content. And I get that. And teachers need to be concerned with the diet they're serving out. But when you go to Ephesians or Hebrews 5, I won't take the time to look at it, but look at Hebrews 5, verses 11, 12 there. The author of Hebrews says, you're all concerned about these theological issues, particularly end times conversations and some ascetic practices. He says, you're all in a buzz about that. He said, by now, you need to be a teacher, and you're concerned about these elementary principles. You want to go back to the basics all over again. And so what he's saying there is, you want to grow? Don't always be looking for somebody else to disseminate knowledge to you. You teach, you reproduce. And one of the best ways to grow is by teaching others. So, God's Word, it identifies error. It creates excellence. And as for a model for discipleship, look differently about truth. Look differently about knowledge. You are a steward of that knowledge. Share it.